my name is Catherine. I'm the program coordinator at Wachusett Reservoir. I'm so happy to see you today. Thank you so much to the library for hosting this program. At the Wachusett Reservoir, every 10 years, our scientists do a creel survey. And recently, they found that a lot of the anglers that fish at the reservoir come from the town of Fitchburg. So really happy to be here today to reach out to the community. We have some information if you'd like to take home with you after the presentation, and a list if you want to leave your email, and then I will send you like once a month upcoming events so you can stay in touch with us. But delighted to introduce you to Ranger Will that is here, and he's going to do this awesome presentation combining history and fishing. And so say a little bit about yourself and take it over.
Thanks, Catherine. So my name's William Anderson. When I developed this program, I was one of the Ranger Lieutenants at Wachusett Reservoir. So I'm with the Department of Conservation and Recreation, but we're in the Division of Water Supply Protection. So our mission is all about the water quality of the reservoir, right? And ultimately that is to serve the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority to provide pure, clean drinking water to over 3 million people in Massachusetts now. So when you think about that, the population of Massachusetts is just over 6 million people. So the MWRA DCR water system serves half of the population of Massachusetts. So it's a critically important function on that end, and that is our primary mission and purpose, is the protection of water quality. But with that comes what else we have, right? We have an amazing recreational resource, the natural land and the reservoir as a fishery. And we also have the historical aspects, right? There's a lot of history there, from the takings of parts of the towns to create the reservoir. So this program basically kind of came out of my love of history and of fishing, and one of the main functions of the Ranger program is to work with our users and deal with the violations as they come and when they happen, but also to be the stewards of the property and interact with our good users of the property, and a lot of those are anglers. So kind of combined two of the things that I'm passionate about, came up with this, developed the program. I hope you all enjoy it. I guess it's going up on the public access channel if you know anyone else that will want to check it out. We'll kind of dive right into it. The first half of the program is more of the history, what was fishing like during the creation and up through the current day. And the back half of the program is what's the reservoir like today? What can you go out and try to catch as an angler or maybe an aspiring angler to kind of get out there. So in the back, I have to call him out because it wouldn't be any fun if I didn't. He is Ranger Lieutenant Andy Leahy. So he's going to be observing, and he's in uniform, so any official questions can go to Andy at the end. No, I'm just kidding. And he'll be taking over the program, so he's here kind of shadowing tonight. But he's been a big help with this, kind of developing, especially on the history side. He's a great resource. So if you have history questions, grab his ear before you go. All right, let's jump in, and hopefully everything works. I already messed it up. All right, so Wachusett Reservoir. It is the largest hand-dug reservoir in the world. Wachusett and Quabbin combined provide clean drinking water to over 3 million people in Massachusetts. Now, what does that mean, hand-dug reservoir? At the time, we're of the turn of the last century, not 2000, 1900, right? Diesel engines, gasoline engines, they're emerging or not even out there yet, right? We're talking 1895, so it's mostly steam engines. Almost all of the manual labor is done by hand, and other than that, they still considered shoveling coal into a steam engine hand work. There was only a few steam engines out there, some water pumps, and some things up at the dam for cableways, but essentially this whole entire project, the reservoir basin and the dam, is all by hand. So just some quick facts for you to put everything into perspective. The project itself took about 10 years. The legislation, the laws, the acts passed to take the land and to create the reservoir was in 1895. but real work started in 1896 on the aqueduct to about 1906. The amazing thing is, right, 10 years during this time seems like really fast, right? They didn't even start laying a stone for the dam until 1901, and they were done with the dam in 1905. It took 4 years to build the Wachusett Dam, which is incredible. A lot of the other work for the first 4 years, 1896 to 1900, was the aqueduct. How do we get the water to the existing reservoirs that we have already at the Sudbury system? And then some finished work on the dam was in 1906. Took 2 years to fill, first filled in 1908. It holds 65 billion gallons of water and about 4,100 acres of surface area. There's about 37 miles of shoreline. I think that may include the islands, but it's still quite a bit of shoreline. And it remains an unfiltered water supply. We are one of the last unfiltered water supplies left in the world, if not, the country. Most systems have gone that are surface water to filtration. We have not. We treat our water. They treat it with ozone bubbles and UV light, and that kills bacteria, but we do not filter it. We have a filtration waiver because of the extensive watershed protection efforts that we have to protect the water quality, and that saves the people that drink the water hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in costs of building a filtration plant and filtering the water. So the water quality of the reservoir is outstanding. So we'll do some alphabet soup real quick, so you'll see as time goes on, the agency's name that was in charge of the same resource has changed multiple times. During the time of construction, it was known as the Metropolitan Water Board, went over to the Metropolitan Water and Sewage Board in 1901, and what many folks remember the Wachusett and Quabbin system as the Metropolitan District Commission. 1919, when they consolidated water, sewage, and parks, all the way up until 1985, they spun off the water division of the MDC and created what is now the MWRA. They are in charge when the water goes into the pipe, it is the MWRA. When it's the reservoirs, the open surface reservoirs, and the watersheds, the land, it's DCR. And in 2003, the MDC was merged with the Parks Agency and became DCR. All right, so here's just a real quick overview of the system. It starts in Boston and it goes west. You can see these big red lines, those are the aqueducts. The system originally started in Contituate in the Natick area. There was a small pond, Jamaica Pond first, but a real watershed system was around the Sudbury first, moved further west to the Wachusett, right in the middle of the screen, worked their way west to Quabbin, and you'll kind of see as it goes, there's more and more green, more and more land. The further west they went, as time marched on, they learned a lot of lessons, and one of them was watershed protection. They're building these reservoirs, but they have no land buffer to protect the water coming in, right? So by the time they get to Quabbin, they realize we have to take everything in this watershed. They disincorporated 4 towns, took as much land as they possibly could, more than they really even needed in some places. So you can kind of see that difference as we get away from the city and get to Quabbin, all of that land. The system is gravity fed, it's all pressure. There are no pumping stations except in parts of Boston where they have to bring it up a hill. The system works on the amount of pressure from the elevation. It's about 530 feet at Quabbin, pushes down to about 395 at Wachusett, continues to push down at the Sudbury, all the way to Boston City Base, which is essentially sea level, 0. So you have 500 feet of elevation pushing on that water. It's all gravity fed, which is another amazing feat and cost-saving feature of Massachusetts' water system. Here's a kind of current map of the reservoir. A lot of you probably would recognize this or kind of recognize the area. We have numbered gates around the reservoir. Public access starts on the Route 70 side here, down at the bottom at gate 6. And you can start hiking and fishing from shore all the way around the reservoir, down 140, around Thomas Basin, which is like the old stone church. A lot of people know that area. Back up Route 110 towards Clinton, and then fishing stops at gate 36 at the start of the North Dike. You see that big red line going across. These are available online. If you want to grab one, download it on your phone, and we may have some printed ones with us, or we have them at our regional office in West Boylston that you can grab. So, here's a comparative map in 1971. This was by the MDC, the Water Division. I kind of put this in there to just give you some perspective of how things have changed in technology and you know, map making. And the funny thing that I get out of it is they mislabeled the South Dike. I'm not really sure what happened, but bit of a typo there. The South Dike is actually on the other side of what that is shown as a limit of fishing. But generally it's about the same shore areas off of 70, 140, Thomas Basin, 110. One thing that did change is that previous to the late 90s, you could actually fish from gate 3 all the way around to gate 36. The only prohibited fishing areas were the North Dike, South Dike, and the dam. That changed before 9/11 with water supply security coming into people's minds. It was too close to the intake building where the water gets picked up, and they wanted to push people away from that intake.
You want to point those areas over that you're talking about?
Sure, yep. I don't have a pointer, but so here's our intake works right here up in Clinton. This is the actual South Dike right here. It's mislabeled as down here. So it was prohibited to fish along the North Dike, the dam, and the South Dike, but everything else was open. And basically still is today. The only thing that's happened is this line is now pushed down to Hastings Cove. So that you've lost 2 gates to fish, but that's the side where the intake is on. So we're keeping public access and essentially human activity further away from the intake. So we'll start off right in the 1890s. So June 30th, 1899, the Water Board votes to allow, till further order, fishing in Sandy Pond in Clinton and the South Branch of the Nashua River above the dam site. So this tells you right off the bat, the Water Board recognizes that recreation is going to be something that will occur here and that they're supportive of. Because even as they're taking the lands and haven't even started on the dam yet, they're allowing fishing in the river that will eventually fill up to become the reservoir. Here's a picture of Sandy Pond. This is in Clinton. This will become a sunken pond underneath the reservoir. This is in December of 1896. So for perspective, here's during creation, during construction, they have stripped the land. We are now in June of 1902. The same look, outlook, same perspective, and you can see the roads are starting to get filled in. We have one lone house left, still up here on our right, and there's a little sign right on the shoreline, and obviously I don't know what it says, but it must relate to fishing. It's right on the shore of the pond. And you can imagine, at this time, even during construction, they're allowing people to fish. Now we get up to 1905. Construction is nearing its end. It only has about a year to go. The reservoir is starting to fill in some areas, and you can see now how Sandy Pond will be sunk, and I'll show you where the current water line is. It's right about here on this riprap. So this Sandy Pond will eventually be sunken underneath the reservoir. And for perspective, Gate 40, which is South Main Street in Clinton, runs right down here and stops right out of the frame, and then you'd be on the North Dike. So that house was right here that you saw on that other slide. So you can walk down here. This is open to public access, just South Main Street, Clinton. You'll walk right here and you'll be able to see this view today. So jump into the 1900s. 1909, construction of the reservoir is complete. Now the Metropolitan Water and Sewage Board votes to open the reservoir to fishing by special regulation. What do you need? You need a special permit is required. At this time, it's only available to residents of the 4 towns directly around the reservoir. Boylston, West Boylston, Clinton, and what a lot of people don't realize, there is a very small corner of Sterling that is in the reservoir that has water, and it's at gate 36. And believe it or not, ice fishing was allowed during this time. It's a comment I've gotten for my whole career. Yes?
So are Fisher residents allowed to fish?
At this time, in 1909, no. Only, correct, yep. So you got to imagine where 120 years ago, when the construction is done, the only people that can legally fish it are the 4 towns that live around it and the Metropolitan Water District. So that was kind of a little caveat, right? So if you lived in Boylston, you could go down to the reservoir, you could get your permit, and you could fish. But if you lived in Boston or the suburbs of Boston, at that time it was about 20 cities or towns that were on the system, you could also fish the reservoir. So I'm sure there was probably some people from, you know, maybe Lancaster that said, well, what about us? We're kind of left out, right? And this stays into effect for about 60 years. And we will do questions and answers at the end, so anything else pops up, save it and we'll get to you at the end. So again, think about this. Hear a lot about, why wouldn't we allow ice fishing? We actually did. We allowed ice fishing when it was first completed. It was allowed west of Greenhelge Point, which I'll show you coming up, which is essentially near the current fishing limit. So if you look at this map, 1909, ice fishing is allowed anywhere from the Narrows west. So Thomas Basin, Old Stone Church, South Bay, main body of the reservoir, Boylston area, all the way to Greenhelge, which is what we call the Narrows here, the narrowest point of the reservoir. This is all open to ice fishing. Now we jump into the 1920s, things are going to start changing. 1921, April, the previous regulations about fishing at the reservoir are repealed and ice fishing is now prohibited in all areas. I didn't find any documentation on why, but I can imagine a couple things happened. One, somebody probably fell in. It's probably safe to say the ice conditions at some point, you know, in that about 11-year period that they allowed ice fishing, something must have went wrong. I think it's reasonable to assume, right? And things were emerging like public health concerns, water quality, testing water quality, things like that. I think they probably realized that having people out on the ice, they're still out on the water. And if they leave litter behind or they do what people have to do, use the bathroom, right? Those things will eventually pollute the waters that they're on, even though it's frozen. So didn't find any direct evidence to it, but I think it's reasonable to assume that's probably what happened. We'll jump into the 1930s. May 1936, some salvage work was done for other Commonwealth waters after severe flooding. So at the time, it was called the Department of Conservation, Division of Fisheries and Game, which will become what we all know now as Mass Wildlife, and the Metropolitan District Commission, which will become us, DCR. So what is salvage work? Well, salvage work is something that would never be done today. Salvage work is going to a water body, netting fish in that water body, and bringing it to another water body and depositing it in there to try to get a fish population. Something we don't do, right? Now we know there could be invasive aquatic species like plants or invasive aquatic animals, right? So a lot of issues with that at this time. It wasn't maybe even known or a big of a concern, but that's what was done. So we have pictures, documentation from that time. They went all around the reservoir, Boylston, Clinton, Sterling, with boats, with nets. Looked like seine nets, gill nets, all different stuff and gear. The MDC was involved, the Department of Conservation was involved, Fisheries and Game. You can kind of see, I love the old pictures here with the, was it pork pie hat? Like that's good stuff. You know, fedoras and everything. It has who we have, the Director of Fisheries. And you can see, we've got some nice bass, right? We've got some, looks like pickerel there. So some really nice fish getting pulled out of the reservoir that's really less than 30 years old at this point. So there is a well-established great fishery 30 years in.
Are they going to transport those fish to another?
That's what they did. Pulled them out of Wachusett and brought them somewhere else.
Okay.
Like I said, something that would never be done today.
It's stocked and Do we stock it with trout now?
We do, yep. And at the end, we'll do a question and answer, and I'll get everything for you that I can. So here's some more pictures. Here's an example of the net that they're using. Based off of the background, this to me looks like it's up by the dam in Clinton. You can kind of see this point. To us, it looks like Pine Point. And this is the MDC staff out there on the boats, running these nets, and just going through, collecting all the fish, getting them in that truck, and driving them off. And here's another cool picture of another huge bass. And you know, at this time, it's probably a pickerel. There really aren't northern pike in the reservoir, so to me, it looks like it's a pickerel. But I mean, huge fish. All right, 1939. Reservoir is now closed due to drought conditions and concerns of wildfires until at least 1940. Something happened right before this, right? The hurricane of 38. It was something like millions of board feet of trees came down during that hurricane, and it was left all over this area in the general kind of Clinton, Boylston area. So you got to figure our forest, our water filter, right, has millions of board feet of, you know, trees down in the state. But in that area, I'm sure, you know, thousands of board feet down. And they're worried as it dries out and they have all this stuff down that there's going to be a fire and something's going to happen. So they close fishing to prevent that public access, people coming in the hopes of preventing a fire. But notice they say until at least 1940 in the meeting minutes at the time, right? Something else is going to come up that's going to change things. 1940s.
World War II.
December 8th, 1941, national war emergency. Wachusett is closed to all public access. You cannot step foot on MDC property during World War II. People photographing the dam have their cameras confiscated and film destroyed by the then MDC police. Fishing is prohibited. Conservation officers, which are known as game wardens or today the environmental police, they were actually transferred to the MDC for special guard duty of the reservoirs and aqueducts, which is a fascinating fact that I was able to pull out of some of these historical records. Now, it doesn't go on through the whole war. It goes through till the victory in Japan. So May 10th, 1945, I think it's clear that the war is coming to an end. There's victory in Japan. MDC votes to allow fishing again. Europe. I had them backwards. Victory in Europe, VE Day. Fishing is allowed after VE Day. I think they see the writing on the wall coming up in August. So during this time, they postponed it a little bit. They're going to allow fishing starting on July 1st of 1945. So it's a shortened season, and they're going to let it go through October 1st. Now we get into the 1950s. This is some interesting stuff, especially for people that fish for lake trout. So in 1952, lake trout are first stocked in Quabbin, along with rainbow smelt, which is their forage fish, essentially their food, in the 2 following years. 1953, walleye eggs were obtained from the state of New York. They were reared in Palmer, and they also put them into Quabbin. Quabbin really thought that they could get a population of walleye established. That was their goal, was to have a really high quality walleye fishery. It did not work. They tried multiple times, but the conditions of the water there just aren't conducive for the walleye for some reason. It's too clear, cold, it's almost too pure for walleye. They just didn't take. 1958, something that did take was smelt. The reproduction's so successful, they're clogging the intake screens at Quabbin. Water can't get through the intake at Quabbin to get to Wachusett, right? So Laker introduction after about 6 years is successful after 3 attempts. The first 2 tries with Lakers, they introduced them, but they weren't self-reproducing. They weren't getting their own established population. On the 3rd try, they've documented that they've got now self-reproducing lake trout, just before 1960, which is going to be important with that timeline, right? 1958, Quabbin successful, but there's something down the line to the east. 1959, Smelt is so prolific, the MDC has to start a smelt control program at Quabbin. They use copper sulfate to kill the smelt eggs in the tributaries. Tributaries are where the streams and rivers come into the reservoir, right? That's where the smelt would go to reproduce. That's where they would go and they do their thing and come back down. They hand harvested 5 tons of adult smelt. They were going up into the rivers and netting out, and they netted 5 tons of smelt out. Now, during this time, they documented shoal spawning, which is shoreline, the gravelly area, the shallow area along the shoreline. This is key because what will happen from this is smelt at Quabbin and Wachusett now reproduce in the shoals, in the shallow, gravelly areas. They really don't reproduce in tributaries anymore from that harvest. They kind of learned and they adapted and they spawn on the shoals. Jump into the 1960s. Walleye program at Quabbin is discontinued. Water's too infertile and too acidic for the species, and this is coming from Mass Wildlife at the time. However, they put in 900 final walleye that were transferred from undisclosed Massachusetts lake, which I thought was kind of funny. Even Mass Wildlife wouldn't tell where they were getting the walleye from to Quabbin, and that's another example of that salvage work that used to be done. And that was it for the Quabbin walleye experiment. 1963, 1964, Quabbin investigation showed lake trout are now reproducing. So they've got a good, healthy, reproducing, population of lakers at Quabbin. May 2nd, 1963, another big change. MDC votes to allow fishing on Sundays for the first time. So for the younger people, there's a thing called blue laws that were a big thing in Massachusetts and New England states, kind of a remnant from the Puritan era. There were certain things that you could not do on Sundays: purchase alcohol, fish at MDC reservoirs. So that's pretty crazy when you think about it today, but May 2nd, 1963, fishing on Sunday is allowed. This is an actual copy of the rules and regulations that used to be sent out with your map and your permit, typed up on an index card. If you read through this, it's essentially the same thing as today. It really just talks about, again, the resident restriction is in place at this time, so it's the 4 towns and the water district, but can't fish from the dam and the dikes. You'll get your fishing season in the permit, daylight hours only, sunrise to sunset. So even today you can actually fish for longer, because at this time at sunset, we're 1 hour after now. Please take note again, no fishing north and south dike. Sanitary violations and smoking will not be tolerated. That's a big misconception today that smoking is not allowed. It wasn't allowed during this time. Also, and this is a great line, I love it, I think we should put it in our maps now. All sportsmen should endeavor to see that the regulations included in this permit are strictly adhered to if they wish this privilege to be continued. So I think that's a nice little language there about being a sportsman, and that's being a steward of the property, taking care of the land that you're using for recreation. A lot of the other stuff is the same. Don't do anything that would pollute the water. Don't build any fires or smoke on the property of the Commonwealth. Make sure you have your permit in possession and give it to any official employee that asks for it. And at this time, any violation of the regulations, your permit to fish was revoked. So they had something there, a tool in hand, that if there was a problem, they could pull your permit. And then it does say that all other fishing regulations in the Commonwealth must be adhered to. But really, when you run through it, it's almost all the same stuff as today. 68, lake trout and rainbow smelt stocking resume at Quabbin. They did do a little pause for a while, and now screens for the intakes are being studied to try to help solve that smelt clogging situation. 1969, MDC removes the residency requirement for fishing permits. It's now open to all who apply and hold a valid state fishing license, and it was 25 cents. So in 1969, this is the first time that people outside the water district and the 4 towns can fish the reservoir legally. Jump up into the 1970s. Here's our map again. This is what was included with your permit. You'd get a map, you'd get a set of rules and regulations, kind of already ran through that. The neat thing here now, Sudbury is mentioned. First time that I found anything mentioning the Sudbury Reservoir in Southborough and Marlborough. At this time, you could only fish the extreme northern portion of Sudbury, which is essentially around Farm Road. That area off of Farm Road was fishable and nowhere else. And I believe, Andy can correct me if I'm wrong, they had cedar posts sunk painted with red on the top, and that was your line of fishing, and they were on either side of the reservoir. No map for the Sudbury though, but that is changing. Stay tuned. 1970, permit fee increases to 50 cents and 100% increase in 1971. I'm sure that probably didn't go over well, jumping like that, but who knows. 1972, screens are now installed at the intake works at Quabbin, trying to help solve that clogging problem with the smelt. So here's just some historical documents. This is from the MDC. It's an inter-office correspondence from the Water Division, and it's an environmental impact statement regarding night fishing. So basically at this time, it's 1973. The dirty little secret is there are no MDC police stationed at Wachusett. They come around, they do a loop, they come out from what is at the time the Upper Basin in Brighton, which is outside of Boston, and they would do a loop around and they would do their checks. But they're coming from Brighton on an 8-hour shift. How much were they really around, right? So in reality, was night fishing going on? Yes, it was, right? So what is the issue with night fishing? This is what was studied by the director of the Water Division. We have this many, 65 billion gallons, 4,000 acres. Here's some arguments against, right? Pollution load will be greater. Fishing's not the problem, it's human waste associated with it. Fishing trips are family excursions, which means more people in the watershed, more people on the property. Greater difficulty of control, causing higher maintenance cost. Litter's likely to increase if we allow night fishing. Additional cost of maintenance and policing. And then public use creates fire hazards for critical watershed areas and shore plantings. So that's kind of the argument against, but the argument for from the director is there's no great objection from Water Division personnel, so everybody seems to be on board within the MDC. Could be on a trial basis, which is a key word. Due to difficulty of policing these areas, poaching and night fishing is being done illegally. So he's fully admitting this is happening anyway, so we might as well look at it to try to make it a legal effort and some type of control. Some fish are easily caught during evening hours, right, in the dark, catfish. No need to establish new facilities. There shouldn't be any adverse effect on animal or bird life. And this is a good one. It will improve the image of the commission, the MDC, among the residents of the adjoining towns, right? So we're playing well with our neighbors. They live there, they abut the property, they can walk to it, they could fish at night. And then this is a great one of true sportsmen, who I would include night fishermen, are good friends of the water supply system. So what do? So we allow night fishing for 1 year. This is a letter to a representative at the time in Boston, David Lionette, and it's just advising him that night fishing is now allowed for his constituency, and that the cost of the permit is $1. If you have any other questions, let me know, and it's coming from the executive secretary of the MDC. There is no reference to night fishing after 1973, so I can imagine it did not go well. They allowed it for one fishing season, and that's the last that I could find any documentation on it. I would assume it had its host of issues of people probably making a night of it. It probably became more of a camping situation. I'm sure that there was fires on the shoreline and in the woods, which could lead to damage to our filter, the forest. I'm sure there was sanitary issues with going to the bathroom in the watershed, right? There's no porta-johns at this time. So whatever happened, I think it's reasonable to assume those are probably the issues. Night fishing is no more. Not legally anyway.
Do they allow it now?
They do not. Yep. One season only, never to be seen again. So this picture's from a newspaper article. It's believed to be 1973. Mass Wildlife did not have the date on this. This was in their archive. So this is Richard Derries of 522 Grafton Street, I assume Worcester, hoists a huge northern pike he caught in the Quinnipoxet River near Wachusett Reservoir. Fish was 46 inches long and weighed 21.5 pounds. It's the longest ever recorded from inland waters and the second heaviest pike. The crazy thing about this is there are no northern pike in the Wachusett Reservoir or the Quinnipoxet River. The flooding was so bad in 1973, it's believed it flowed down from another river or pond or lake and was flushed into the Quinnipoxet, and this guy caught it. So that will never happen again unless someone introduces one. But it's a great picture.
Why does he have no shirt on?
Great question. He's living the dream. He's living the life.
How long was that?
46 and 5/8 inches long, 21.5 pounds. Happy guy right there. So a couple more little details here, 1976, 1977. This is a bill that's introduced by Mr. Wetmore of Barry. He is wanting to study basically how are we going to study the feasibility of allowing fishing through the ice. So here we are 50 years later when they already tried ice fishing. Now representatives and senators of the area are saying, well, can we look at ice fishing again, right? I'm sure they were getting some pressure from their constituents. We want to ice fish the Wachusett, so they start sending letters and filing bills to study it. So now we jump forward a year, and this is coming from the aquatic biologist for Mass Wildlife, right? So here are their kind of statements on night fishing. 50 years later, more science, more things are known. Illegal ice fishing is currently going on at Wachusett. Fact, right? There's no way that it affects the existing population of large salmonids in a manner that a legal fishery would. So what does that mean in real terms? The poaching is so small, it's not affecting the population right now, but if we allowed it, they would be taking so many fish out of here, it would affect those fish, mainly Atlantic landlocked salmon in the future, and at this time, lake trout. And another answer here is precisely because the regulations and the low exploitation rate that Wachusett offers, no ice fishing, the Massachusetts angler has the best opportunity to catch a trophy-sized laker or brown trout. So because they don't allow year-round fishing for that species, they're allowed to grow. They have some settling time, they have growth time. They're not exploited year-round, and that's making it a trophy fishery. They would have to increase the minimum length requirements because they'd be catching short fish and be keeping them, damage the population. And then they'd have to do a thorough biological investigation if they really wanted to try to do ice fishing, which, as you can imagine, was not allowed. So they pushed for it, but Mass Wildlife had some good, sound answers and science behind why it would be an issue. That's not even taking in account the public health side that never even got addressed. Again, you're out on frozen drinking water. You're going to pollute it. So it never even got that far. It was shut down at the Mass Wildlife level, which to me is common sense and was a good decision. Bump up to 1979. Now lake trout are sampled in Wachusett by Mass Wildlife staff. Lake trout were not stocked at Wachusett. They're believed to have traveled through the aqueduct before the screens were installed. So full fish, fingerlings, all coming down the aqueduct, getting introduced to Wachusett for, at this time, about 20 years. 20 years they're getting flushed down the aqueduct, and Wachusett was known as a brown trout fishery, trophy brown trout fishery, right? Once the Lakers got in there, things changed rapidly. Brown trout went and plummeted in numbers. The lake trout are like a voracious fish. They eat everything. They eat all of the forage fish, all of the food that the brown trout ate, and they got outcompeted. and the Lakers essentially took over. And now it's extremely rare to get a brown trout out of Wachusett, and if you do, it's likely on the Quinnipoxet River in West Boylston, not the actual main body of the reservoir. Bump up into the 1980s. Now we start the salmon stocking. It started in 1982 in the reservoir's tributaries, and the salmon started to naturally reproduce in the Stillwater River in West Boylston. This is a great letter from Fish and Wildlife from Lee McLaughlin. He would eventually have a fish hatchery named after him, if that name rings a bell, the McLaughlin Fish Hatchery. He's reporting what he stocked into the Wachusett brooks and rivers. And the big one here, we've got Gates Brook, 300 to 400, Trout Brook in Holden, 300 to 400. But we jump down to the Quinnipoxet River in Holden and West Boylston, 10 to 11,000. That's where the bulk of the salmon were introduced. That's where in their DNA and their brain they want to go to spawn. That's where they want to go to reproduce. They only put a couple thousand in the Stillwater, but there's a big problem on the Quinnipoxet. There's a dam there off of River Road. And as soon as they put that dam in the 1930s, they put a fish ladder in and it never worked. The design, just don't know what the issue was. The fish ladder never worked and the salmon could not get above that dam to reproduce. So they changed it up and they found the Stillwater and they went there and they still today spawn on the Stillwater. It's heavy, it's usually after the first rain in the fall, typically late October, early November, but it can change because if we don't have a cold, heavy rain, it could go a little bit into November. And then jump into the 1990s. So lake trout that were previously entered Wachusett through the aqueduct have now established a self-sustaining population and is usually utilizing smelt. This is when essentially you're starting to not see brown trout in the main body of the reservoir anymore. Lakers have officially kind of taken over. And now we are known as a lake trout fishery. Which is, you know, a good thing and a bad thing. It's too bad that the brown trout population declined, but Lakers are a very desirable fish to catch. So we kind of went over the history, right? So what about the reservoir today? What can you catch today? What is in there? And what do we do to help protect the fishery and the reservoir? Well, we have 8 state fishing records. Something new is catch and release. It's a newer category. Started around 2018, but for catch and keep, for this category, you have to kill the fish. It is not legal in Massachusetts to transport live fish unless it is a listed bait fish species. So the, flip side of catch and keep is by the letter of the law, you are supposed to have that fish dead when you go and you weigh it. You are supposed to keep that fish. So we have white perch, which is a relatively recent one. We'll see further down the line, 3 pounds, 8 ounces, 2016. Rainbow trout, that's a stocked species, 13 pounds, 13 ounces, 1999. Smallmouth bass, 8 pounds, 2 ounces, and 8-pound smallie is incredible. It'd blow your mind if you saw it in person. Landlocked salmon, 10 pounds, 2 ounces, 1985. And the record that I kind of feel safe saying will never be broken, brown trout, 19 pounds, 10 ounces, 1966. That's a lock, more to lock. We'll see what happens, but
Lake Ontario.
Yep, I'm pretty confident in that one. Catch and release, relatively new. Lake trout, 34 inches. That is a huge fish if you think about it. 2020. This is a great category because if you have a tape, you pull the fish out of the water, get down, tape the fish, take a photograph. There's a way to submit it to Mass Wildlife and get that fish right back in the water. So it's a good way if you don't want to harvest it to still be in the running for a gold pin or a state record. Smallmouth bass, we actually have 2 now. It's both 23.5 inches. Catch and release doesn't do weight. They do length only, and that's the issues with certified scales, right? Not everyone's gonna have one. You would have to transport it. It's not legal. So catch and release is taping measurement only. Both 2020 and 2022. And then white perch, 18 inches in 2018. We had the Laker record for a very long time, but it was broken in 2016 by a boat fisherman at Quabbin. I think his last name was Roy. You can Google it. If you Google Quabbin record lake trout, it's something to see. But they cheated because they used a boat. So you have to imagine, all those state records are from shore. That was not caught by a boat out trolling in the middle of the reservoir. So it's an incredible thing that we have. So these are some records on creel surveys. What's a creel survey? It's just interviewing anglers and asking them, what did you catch? How long were you here? What did you use? Things like that. Some past surveys were done by Fish and Wildlife in 1980 and 1998, and you see a big trend change in the colors, right? In 1980, yellow is yellow perch. Sunfish is blue, smallmouth is brown, rock bass is purple, rainbow trout is pink, and other is black. So at 1980, everyone's really catching yellow perch, which is really like a bait fish. It's what you can throw out legally back on your line. You can catch yellows, put them on your line live, and throw them back out. Okay, well now we get to 1998, lake trout, 27%. So in 18 years, we had no lake trout to 30% lake trout. It's showing you what's happened with that population, right? Light blue sunfish, yellow's yellow perch again, brown smallmouth. Now largemouth show up in green, and we have a little bit of rainbow and pink and some other stuff. Salmon shows up in red at 4%. So 1998, it's been going on since 1982. We've got salmon on the board. 2011 and 2012, this is now a new combination effort between DCR, Water Supply, Fish and Wildlife. It's a collaborative creel survey, and it's very labor intensive. We are walking shoreline, checking every angler and asking every single person that we see. So there's a lot more information, a lot more data. Ask me how I know. I was one of the guys doing it for 4 or 5 times, so not that I'm bitter. Brown smallmouth. We've really swung over to the smallmouth in 11 and 12. Lake trout 24, about the same as 98. We've got sunfish again. Largemouth, great year for largemouth, kind of an outlier, 10%. And then largemouth is green. So we've made a big bump up here. It's kind of like an outlier that year, 10%. And then we've got salmon in red, rainbow, yellow perch. White perch shows up a little bit, 3%, and then other. Other could be anything. It could be misidentified. It could be another fish like a rock bass that doesn't have enough that were caught to get its own category. Bump up to 2017. Lake trout is by and far the most popularly caught fish, 39%. Huge. 13 is sunfish. Brown again, green is largemouth. 12% yellow perch. I think here too you're seeing something. Lakers, yellow perch. Yellow perch are their bait fish that you can catch legally and throw back out. I think that's an effect of people are targeting yellows to put back on to live line and catch a laker. There was a creel survey done in 2022. We don't have the slides on that yet, but the information's online. So if you really want to deep dive on it, just search DCR Wachusett Reservoir creel surveys. There's an entire page on it, and it's more than you're ever going to want to know.
What is that website again, please?
So just the easiest way to find it, I would go to mass.gov. When you get to the main page, there's a giant search bar. Put in Wachusett Reservoir Creel Survey. It takes you to a landing page where it has all of our creel survey information. It's a great resource. You can go back all the way to 2011. So in 2018, our aquatic biologists did some electrofishing. It was a collaborative effort between DCR and Mass Wildlife. They did 2 survey days in late June. They targeted all species and size classes. And essentially what this was, we knew a lot about sport, fish, things that anglers target on purpose, but they weren't really sure what else was in the reservoir that people weren't targeting, so they kind of wanted to know. So they targeted both recreational, and game fish, so smallmouth, white perch, yellow perch, sunfish. Here's some examples of what they're doing. They have a net, they're measuring, they've got their stuff that they're taking all their data on. They've got a live well, so they've got a bass in there. So it's kind of interesting. They only did it for 2 days. They haven't done it since. Well, they have done it since, but we'll probably get into that later. So what are some of the species that you can catch at the reservoir, right? We've got this amazing resource. We have all these records. Well, what's in there? So we have black crappie. It's also known as a calico bass. You can kind of see from that flaked pattern between black and different shades of green how it kind of gets its calico name, like a cat. Here's one caught during electrofishing, so you can really get an idea of what they look like. It's pretty neat. Bluegills, usually known as a sunfish. You can tell their flap by their, back of their eye is black. It's a black flap. It's a really good indicator that you've got a bluegill. Here's one caught during electrofishing, and you can really see you've got this shimmery blue here underneath its mouth and under the body, but you've got that black flap right there. Really stands out. And then there's a little teeny yellow perch right there. We have brook trout. These are some stocked, but some native. The Wachusett River in West Boylston has a native population of small little brook trout, and they self-reproduce. And a lot of the fly fisher people, like they love it up there. Really beautiful fish, distinctive. They have the blue and red dots. They have white and black on the face of their fins, so they're really easily identifiable. They're kind of known as like the most beautiful fish in North America. They really are something special. We have brown bullheads, which is called a horn pout, or some people call them a catfish. Easy way to tell that you've caught a brown bullhead. Look at the barbels coming off the jaw, right? If the barbels are brown, it's a brown bullhead. Brown trout, they are still in the reservoir, but mostly around the Wachusett River. Pretty distinctive again. They're a salmonid, but they have that brown kind of coloring with those red spots, and their tail is not forked. It's a flat tail on the back, so you can kind of tell the difference between a laker. You could get it confused, but the lakers are really distinctive because they're green with yellow spots. So if you see something like this with that brown, red spots, you are lucky enough that you've caught a brown. And when they spawn, they do get a hooked jaw. It's usually when they're older and a bigger fish, but they will get that hooked jaw that you see that you might associate with like salmon in Alaska, something like that. Their jaw will start to hook. Here's the former brown trout record of 10 pounds in 1955. It was in the Telegram, and this is a gentleman out of West Boylston, caught it out of the reservoir, and it was 25.5 inches long. It was the largest ever recorded in Massachusetts. It says he was using a spinning rod with 5-pound test and a night crawler, and he battled it for a half an hour. A 5-pound test, a 10-pound fish, that's pretty incredible. It must have been a fun battle. Chain pickerel, they are on the res. You just gotta be careful if you catch them. They have very sharp teeth in the front. Definitely use longer pliers if you're gonna grab those. They can definitely get you. But you'll see northern pike looks a lot similar to this with that pattern, but what we have in the res is chain pickerel. Here's one caught during electrofishing. It's a smaller one, but you can kind of get the gist with that chain running down the length of the fish. Fall fish, it's a white fish, kind of looks like a carp. You might mistake it as like a small carp. It's got that mirrored pattern on it. It's not. These are typically only found in the Stillwater River, muddy areas, murky areas. So unless you fish up on the Stillwater off of like Washacum Street in West Boylston, you probably won't see a fall fish. Here's our big one, lake trout, AKA laker. I believe in 2 places, Maine and Michigan, they call them togue. So if you ever heard of togue, that's also a lake trout. Easiest thing to identify a laker is the tail. It's forked. You see a forked tail, salmonid, trout, it is a laker. They have this worm pattern on the top that goes over their back, that speckled yellow on their green body, but they also have white facing on their fins like a brook trout. So it's something that you'll pick up on and see. Definitely, I would say, our most popular targeted fish, lakers, salmon, and smallmouth bass. Here's some lake trout sampling. Our aquatic biologists are netting them during spawn. Lake trout spawn in the fall. They go out at night on a boat on the reservoir. They do gill net them, but they get them up immediately, pull them out, weigh them, measure them, and then put a pit tag in. This tag has all of their tracking information, and they have a scanner. Every laker that they catch, they run through the scanner, and if it pops, they know that they've caught that fish before, right? And they update the data in that pit tag. They have a way of going into it on a computer and updating its information. So they can track a fish for years. You don't have to, but we do ask if you catch a laker, which I'll show you now, with its adipose fin clipped, that means it has been tagged. You can keep the fish, it's yours to keep, but we do ask if you would like to keep the tracking program going for that fish to put it back into the reservoir. That way it can continue to have that chance of being caught again, because they want to measure how long does it take to grow? What are the growth rates? Are there, weight, all things like that. So the adipose fin is this back fin here on the back, in between its tail, and they just clip it off. It doesn't hurt the fish. It does not affect them for swimming or getting around the reservoir. There's no real effect. So if you see that, that laker has been tagged.
Do you want the tags?
No, because it's implanted in the fish. Back years ago, they used to clip a tag on it, and you could pull that off the fish when you harvested it and turn it in and get some information off of it. Now they are physically implanted in the fish. You cannot see them. So the only way that you know that it's been tagged is that fin is clipped. So if you see that, it would be great if you could put it back in the reservoir. Here's another shot of where that adipose fin is. And then again, intact on the top and clipped off on the bottom. So here's a comparison of lake trout between Wachusett and Quabbin. There's always a little bit of internal, competition between the two reservoirs. This kind of definitively shows you that Wachusett lakers have a higher conditioning factor than Quabbin. So what does that mean? So a laker in Wachusett weighs more at a given length than Quabbin. So say you measure a 12-inch lake trout at each reservoir, the one at Wachusett weighs more. What does that tell you? It's healthier, it has more forage food, it's a healthier fish, its conditioning factor is greater. So Quabbin gets to boast about all sorts of stuff, but we have a healthier lake trout population. So I take the shots when I can get them. Just another proof of the laker condition. You can see it changes throughout the years. Pin awards are in here, years. Last one that we have data on is 2021. Relative condition factor was between 99 and 100 for Wachusett, but you can see that it goes, it takes a dip and goes up. It does vary, but that line's just under 100. And then we look at the comparison at Quabbin. It's come down, this is going back in the 70s, 90s, and then looks what happened. 2012 was peak, and it's crashed, and it totally tanked again in 2021. It was barely above 98. So in recent history, Wachusett does have a higher conditioning factor than Quabbin. So just again, that fish weighs more. It wasn't like that in the 70s. Great conditioning factor, over 101, but it has dropped off. It's likely because of a forage fish issue. Maybe there wasn't as many smelt or something that they could eat. Here's a 40-inch laker caught during sampling. It's like a dinosaur. That thing is crazy. Its eye is like the size of a human.
That came out of Wachusett?
That came out of Wachusett during sampling. Yep. That's one of our former aquatic biologists. Here's Atlantic landlocked salmon. These are the ones that were introduced in the 1980s. Real example, easy way to identify them. They're silver, very scaly, black spots on them. You can't miss them. You're typically going to get them in the Thomas Basin area or off of the Route 12 Causeway or up on the Stillwater when they spawn. Largemouth bass, easy way to identify, long stripe across the body. The jaw extends past the eye on a largemouth. If you hold it open, this jaw goes beyond the eye, and you have that long horizontal line. And here's one caught during electrofishing. Pumpkin seed, kiver might be called, sunfish, easy identification, war paint on its face, and a little red pumpkin seed on the flap. Here's one caught during fishing, electrofishing. You can really tell the war paint's really standing out. Rainbow smelt, forage fish for most of our salmonids, our trout. They do shimmer, they shine. You can really see the rainbow on them. Here is a big school of them going by in the shallows and the schools there. Can't really, you get that one's shimmering right up there. You can kind of see. Here's one washed up after a windstorm. You can see the rainbow in it. It has that rainbow pattern right along the body. It's pretty cool. Rainbow trout gets their name from that pink stripe right down the middle. Really obvious. It's a little dull when they first get introduced, but as they hold over and stay in the reservoir, it gets deep, deep, deep red. Beautiful fish, and you can really tell, but it's one red or pink line down the body. That's how I can tell it's a rainbow. They are stocked, but they do hold over. So if they're not caught that year, they will continue to thrive and hold over, but they really don't reproduce. Rock bass, these are cool little fish. They're actually not a bass, they're a sunfish. You'll see them from time to time, but they're kind of hard to identify. They look like a calico, but they do have spikes on them, so if you catch them, you gotta be careful. You gotta go from the head to the tail, because if you grab them or go from the back, they'll spike you and they'll cut your hand. So be aware. And here you can really see that sail and those spikes off of it. They have a smaller mouth. Tough to tell with calicos, but once you get good at it, it's a more clear pattern than a calico bass. Here's a smallie, easiest way to tell. Red eye, jaw ends before the eye, and they're now vertical stripes. Vertical smallie, horizontal largemouth. Here's a huge one, caught during lake trout sampling. It was just caught with a gill net. They measured it, took a picture and put it back in. It's probably 3-4 pounds. White perch, this is a big one. They have a mirror shimmer by the eye, and they have a line running down their body. They are more white than this kind of example, and we'll see it here. Here's the world record caught in 2016 by Val Percoco, local in Leominster. Her father has fished the reservoir for, I'll say, untold decades. I don't want to give his age away, but he's a long-time regular fisherman. Passed it on to generations after him, which is amazing. It's 3 pounds, 8 ounces, 18 inches long, and 13.5 inches in girth. It's essentially a giant football. It's an amazing fish. And they're in there all day long, so go and try to find one. You might be the next world record holder. But you can really see that mirror now, and they kind of look like a carp. This one's caught during lake trout sampling. White sucker, don't really see them often. Might be in the still water, murkier areas as well, but they are in there. Here's one caught during sampling. You can really tell it looks like a carp too. Couldn't easily misidentify it. Probably no coincidence it was caught at night. Yellow bullhead, same thing, catfish, different than the brown bullhead. Only way to tell, the barbels. The barbels are now yellow. Yellow barbels, yellow bullhead, brown bullhead. And here's a good example of one during lake trout sampling. You can really tell that those barbels are yellow. Yellow perch, huge bait fish. It is legal to catch these and put them back out on your line and throw them back in. They are a live bait species. You can live line them. Lakers love them. So that's something that you'd want to target at the reservoir and then throw back out. You can tell they have that dark green kind of tiger stripe. And here's a good example during electrofishing. And that's it. And I do want to just kind of give some shout outs to folks that kind of helped me put this together. At the time, a lot of these people have moved on, promoted and things, but they helped put this together. Our aquatic biologist in-house at Wachusett, Jamie Carr, Joy Trahan-Liptak, and Max Nyquist. Mass Wildlife's aquatic biologist, who's still in that position, Jason Stolarski. He's out of the Westboro office, the field headquarters. He's a wealth of information. If you ever want to reach out to him, his email, I believe, is posted on that Mass Wildlife website.
What's his name?
Jason Stolarski. Our archivist, Sean Fisher, former MDC archivist, then DCR when we merged. Also a wealth of information. All of the historical photos of the creation came from a project that Sean put on. They were all inventoried, the reservoir, construction, homes, everything during the time, and Sean photographed it all and digitized it, so amazing resource. And also, James E. Cardoza from Fisheries and Wildlife wrote a history on the department. That's available online. So if you really want to dive into some mass wildlife history, you can read James Cardoza's history right from their webpage. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time and the opportunity, and I will answer questions as you have them. Feel free if you're done to head out, but if you have questions, fire away and I'll go as I can.
What's the deepest point of the reservoir? How many feet?
About 120 feet right off the dam. Middle of the dam, the part that sticks out right from the middle is where the intake works are in the dam itself. And right down, that's the old river channel. It's 120 feet deep. Yes?
Do you know how it compares to the Ashby Reservoir?
I don't. I'm not really familiar with that one. No.
Thank you.
Else?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What species of shiners live in the reservoir?
I think there's like basically golden shiners, and really I'm not even sure on the species because I think it's so hard to identify them. People do put live traps out in some of our ponds that are shiner ponds, but the ones that are in there are legal bait fish. I'm not aware of any shiners in the shiner ponds that are not able to be possessed.
What do you mean shiner ponds?
So we have a couple in West Boylston near the Mass Wildlife District office. It's on 140, which is Temple Street, at gate 22. When you go inside gate 22 and you come to a Y intersection, if you go to the left, there's a couple ponds in there, and they hold a native population of shiners, and it is legal to trap them with a live trap. Look it up, go through the abstracts, the Mass Wildlife abstracts. They tell you all the rules and regulations about it. Educate yourself on what you can and can't keep for shiners, because there are some prohibited species. Go online, Google it, what they look like, so you can educate yourself. Because honestly, I don't know what's in there, but I do know what is in there, what the regulars take. It is a legal species, but educate yourself on it. And you
How about slimy sculpins or divers?
Not sure. I'm not sure really. It's a good question. It's something that Andy can do some research on.
Research that.
Yeah, definitely an in-depth question. Yep.
So you're saying that the rainbow trout is the only fish that is stocked in the reservoir?
Rainbows are stocked. Browns are stocked from time to time. Brookies are stocked. And every once in a while they have some leftover salmon. They try not to do it at Wachusett. Salmon is typically stocked at Quabbin because Quabbin's salmon do not self-reproduce. They don't have enough of a population to keep themselves going. So salmon are continually stocked at Quabbin, but if they have a couple thousand left over, they will bring them to Wachusett and they will stock. But it's not regularly enough that they really advertise it.
Does it have anything to do with the Clinton Reservoir?
That's Wachusett. Yeah, yep, same thing. Yeah. Wachusett Dam, Clinton Dam, yep.
I noticed the creel survey, the lake trout, the numbers are just getting, do they anticipate them even going larger? I mean, it seems that...
We'll see. 2022 will come out. It will get posted on that creel landing page for Wachusett. So it is finished. It ends with the fishing season. The biologists have to go through and tally everything and get it into tables, but it may even be available now. If you go home and jump on there, the 2022 stats might be available and you'll be able to see it. I would say it's probably going to hover around the 30% mark. It's probably not going to change much, but it does vary from year to year.
What are smelt populations like now?
It varies from year to year. It's generally healthy. We do see them when they do typically have some that die off on the shoreline when they spawn. Typically in March, they spawn and end of March before fishing starts, and you'll kind of see them left on the shoreline. I'm not going to really say where, but there are places around the reservoir where you can see them. And they're open to public access. More to protect them. You have to be careful with smelt. It's a very specific season on them. And when it's open, it's hook and line only. You cannot net smelt or bucket smelt. You have to catch smelt with a hook and line only during the smelt season. So also that is in the abstracts. Make sure you study up on that. But they are in there. They have good years and bad years. Some years we see thousands on the shoreline. That's a great thing. They've spawned. They're in the res. Some years we don't see too many. I think weather, ice conditions kind of affect it, but they're in there. And feel free to sidebar me if you want at the end if you don't want to ask on camera. So.
How has wildlife such as raptors and beavers affected the reservoir?
Well, we have a lot of them. That's more of kind of like an ancillary, benefit, like a little side bonus that we have, because it's all this natural protected land. We have all sorts of wildlife. Some are good, some kind of hurt, like beavers actually kind of can be a detriment to the water supply. They do carry bacteria, Cryptosporidium and Giardia, which do have health effects to drinking water. So beaver is a maintained species. It is something that they try to keep away from the intakes. But pretty much everything else, we have bald eagles, all sorts of raptors, red-tailed hawks, abundant wildlife, white-tailed deer, fox, really quabbins like the accidental wilderness.
Wild turkeys up there.
Turkeys everywhere. It's an abundance of wildlife because we have all that protected watershed.
And the actual Wachusett Reservoir quadrant, by having those there, have helped the other wildlife?
Absolutely. Yeah, having that amount of protected open space has absolutely helped, both native species that have been here help repopulate, and a lot of species like wild turkey were reintroduced. Bald eagles were reintroduced, and that only happened because Quabbin was so well protected. They hacked bald eagles back into Massachusetts. They built man-made nests for them, brought them in from other areas, and now they self-reproduce, and we have bald eagles in Massachusetts. And if we didn't have 100,000 acres of Quabbin, we may not have bald eagles. So definitely other benefits than just drinking water and fishing.
The deer thrive so well. You had to have a special hunting season because 4 feet up and down, everything was bald. And if you're using that for a filter.
Yeah, for people that don't know, there was no understory at Wachusett. It was all 100-year-old trees. All the browse of the understory, the brush, was all eaten by white-tailed deer. They would strip trees 6 feet down. Everything would be stripped, cedars. So we introduced a controlled hunt in 2018? 2019. See, that's why you're here. And its reservoir zone is gate 6 to 39, white-tailed deer only, by lottery, must go to an orientation, special permit, but that is purely designed as population control for getting our browse back up, getting our understory back up to have a better filter for the reservoir. And it's been very effective. It's worked. The numbers are down. We're in a more healthy range for deer per square mile. The estimates were before the hunt, I think 80 deer per square mile. On the high side, reality may have been lower, but 80 per deer pellet counts. And I think we've dropped all the way down to 12.
That's more like it.
Yeah, we're more in line now with the rest of zone 9, 8 and 9, like the rest of the state, the rest of our general area. Wachusett was so crazy with the deer population, but the controlled hunt has worked, and our numbers are now more in line with the rest.
What about coyote?
Yeah, they're all over. Yep. Don't have too many interaction issues with them.
Yeah, but I mean, the population is good.
Very good.
For
I would say very
habitat
healthy.
that they have. In other words, there's enough habitat for the coyote.
Oh, there's plenty of habitat.
They're just going in your neighborhood. They're all over the place here.
Yep. All right, thanks everybody.